In Gaza, stories don't begin the way they should. They begin with rubble. They begin with silence. They begin where childhood ends too soon, and love becomes resistance. But this story begins with a grandfather. A man named Khaled Nabhan. And a little girl named Reem, his granddaughter, his joy, his soul of my soul. Their story traveled across the world. And not because they asked it to, but because sometimes, the deepest pain speaks louder than words. Khaled was born in Deir al-Bala, a city in the middle of the Gaza Strip. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a fighter. He was a grandfather. A gentle man. A gardener. A soul deeply in love with his land, his people, and his family. He had the kind of face you remember, kind eyes, sun-worn skin, and a beard that framed his warm smile. To the children in his neighborhood, he was Jiddo Khaled. The man who fed the cats. The man who helped carry groceries. The man who always had time for a laugh. Even when life gave him every reason not to. But Khaled's favorite role was being Reem's grandfather. Reem was just 3 years old. Bright eyes, soft curls, a giggle that danced through the house like wind through olive trees. They were inseparable. She followed him everywhere, tugging at his sleeves, sitting in his lap, curling beside him during afternoon naps. And every time she looked at him, he'd whisper to her gently, "Ru al-Ru Yajido. Soul of..." It was late. The sky over Gaza was black, humming with drones. Another night. Another round of bombings. Khaled and his family were huddled in their home. Reem had fallen asleep in her grandfather's arms. The world outside shook with distant explosions, a lullaby of war that Gaza had learned to live with. And then, it hit. An Israeli airstrike. No warning. No sirens. Khaled's home collapsed in a breath. Concrete and metal crushed everything. Dust filled the air. Screams. Silence. Screams again. Khaled woke up beneath rubble. Bloodied. Dazed. But alive. And he started to dig. He called out her name, over and over. Reem. Habibti. Jiddo is here. He clawed through broken stone with his bare hands. His fingers torn open, lungs choked with dust. And finally, he found her. Still. Small. Covered in dust. He picked her up, held her close. Her head rested on his shoulder the same way it always had. But she didn't stir. He whispered through his tears. Ya Allah, Ya Ru al-Ru. Soul of my soul. And that's when the world saw him. A man with nothing left. Holding his granddaughter's lifeless body. Sobbing into the ruins of a home that once rang with her laughter. The footage spread across the world. People cried watching it. They didn't know him. They didn't know her. But they knew what love looked like. And they knew what loss felt like. Khaled didn't hide after that. He didn't retreat into his grief. He carried it with him like a badge. Like armor. In the weeks that followed, he became a symbol. He stayed in the camps, helping those who had nothing. Feeding the cats. Gathering water. Hugging orphans. Burying neighbors. He would still whisper her name. Still cry quietly when no one was looking. But he never stopped moving. He became a grandfather to all of Gaza's children. Even though his heart was broken, he gave what was left of it away piece by piece to anyone who needed love. One journalist said, Khaled turned himself into a one-man relief agency. He had no weapons. Just compassion. And in a war-torn land, that made him dangerous. The war dragged on. Weeks turned into months. But Khaled never left Gaza. He said, "This is my home. This is my soil. This is where Reem sleeps." Then, one day, he heard that a nearby shelter had been struck. He ran without hesitation, like he always did. To help. To carry. To care. But the second strike came without warning. A blast. And just like that, the world lost Khaled. The man who held the world's grief in his arms was now buried beneath the same rubble he spent his life digging through. They found him still clutching a child, not Reem, but someone else's. Because that's who he was until the very end. A protector. A grandfather. A soul too good for this world. The news broke. Grandpa Khaled has been killed. Tributes poured in from across the globe. People who had never set foot in Gaza. People who had never heard his voice. Wept. Not just for him. Not just for Reem. But for everything they represented. Love in a land of loss. Compassion in a time of cruelty. Hope in the heart of despair. Khaled's story wasn't just about one man and his granddaughter. It was a mirror. A reminder. Of what we risk forgetting when we turn away from places like Gaza. Because beyond the politics, beyond the headlines, there are grandfathers who whisper love into their grandchildren's ears. There are little girls who chase butterflies through rubble. There are stories that deserve to be heard. Not because they're tragic, but because they are human. And now, somewhere in the skies beyond this world, Reem rests once again in her grandfather's arms. Safe. At peace. Together. Ru al Yajido. Soul of my soul. Let there be no silence where their names once lived. Let Khaled and Reem live forever in the hearts of those who still believe in love even in war. This was their story. And it will not be forgotten.